Welcome everyone to today's class. We're going to start. So for the people who are new, welcome. And we have a couple rules. I'm Rohan, and we're going to be talking, and I teach the science lessons. Remember to always have good manners and proper etiquette. If you have a question, please go in participants and click a raise hand. And if you have also, you can type your questions in the chat and other people, I will answer to them. And if anyone has an answer to one of my questions, I will gladly call on you for the answer. So our classes start off with the warm up. Then we go over the warm up and we learn about the lesson. And after the lesson is finished, we usually take a small a test. We go over the test and then we do a poll and you're free to go. So 1 second and we'll start. Okay, so you can get started with today's warm up. And type your answers in the chat. Okay. I'll give you guys another minute for the warm up. Okay, then let's go over the warm up. So if you have an answer, please raise your hand in participants. Okay. So let's go with warm up number 1. Name one type of trapping mechanism for carnivorous plants. Remember, I'm not asking for one type of carnivorous plants. I'm talking about the trapping mechanism. So how do they trap, or what type of plant? Okay. So I'll call on, okay. Aryan, what's your answer?
A snap trap.
A snap trap? Okay, that is perfectly correct. That is one type. A snap trap is one type of carnivorous plant. Now let's go on to warm up 2. What are non-flowering plants called? Raise your hand in the chat. Warm up number 2. Okay, Ryan?
They're called gymnosperms.
That's correct. They are called gymnosperms. Okay, so in fact, both of those warm-up answers are correct, but let me quickly talk about warm-up 1 a little bit more. So yes, snap trap is correct, but remember there are 4 other types of trapping mechanisms that we have. We have pitfall traps, we have flypaper traps, lobster pot traps, bladder traps, and of course what you said, the snap traps. Okay, so let's go on to today's lesson. We've been holding on to today's lesson for a couple of weeks now. So let's go over it. The life cycle. So what is a life cycle? A life cycle is a series of stages in a living thing that a living thing goes through its life. So we have a life cycle. Everyone has a life cycle. So all organisms, all plants, all animals, and humans. So a life cycle is defined as the development stages that occur during an organism's lifetime. A life cycle ends when the organism dies. It shows how living things grow and change over time. And life cycles often start as a seed, egg, or live birth, then growing up and then reproducing at the end. All plants and animals go through life cycles and they keep on repeating. That's why it's a cycle, like we talked about. A cycle is endless. It keeps on going on and on and on. Such as the water cycle, it never ends, and the rock cycle. So this is the life cycle. Let's start off with insects. So there are two main different types of insect life cycles: incomplete metamorphosis and complete metamorphosis. So what is metamorphosis? Metamorphosis means a change of form, and it also means transformation or change in shape. So we have all heard of metamorphosis with caterpillars to butterflies. And that happens, for example, the caterpillar starts off as an egg, it then hatches into a caterpillar, and then it faces metamorphosis and becomes a butterfly. So complete metamorphosis. This is shown by more highly developed insects, and there are 4 stages for complete metamorphosis: the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. The larva, or caterpillar for some animals, is the growth phase. It is generally very different from the adult. Usually, the larva and adult use different food sources. Therefore, they are not in direct competition. And this is a distinct advantage as more individuals of the species can be fed. So for example, the larva, like a caterpillar, and the adult, like a butterfly, the adult, which is a butterflies, do not eat, they eat milkweed or from a specific plant, which is what attract monarch butterflies. It's a plant called milkweed. That's where they eat their food. And larvae, the caterpillars, they eat leaves. So there won't be any direct competition. Like the adults won't be killing larvae to get their food. So the pupa, or chrysalis, is a stage of internal reorganization. There are no visible signs on the outside of the body as to activity within. Because of this, the pupal phase used to be called the resting stage. So for example, in the caterpillar life cycle, the chrysalis is when it's in a cocoon. And when the caterpillar is in the cocoon, it eventually becomes a butterfly. So during the pupal phase, the internal organs are broken down and more or less forming a soup, which is a small kind of liquid, which can be moved around the organism. The soup then acts as food for special growth buds to develop. These form the adult bud body. So the soup, so in a caterpillar in the cocoon, its internal organs are broken down to form the soup. Then the soup is acting as the food for the growth buds to develop in the butterfly. When reorganization is complete, the adult is ready to emerge from the chrysalis stage. And when the outside conditions are suitable, the final molt occurs and the adult insect comes out. The wings develop inside the pupal case, and therefore, the type of development is said to be endopterygote. This life cycle is shown by butterflies, moths, bees, wasps, true flies, and many other insects, including beetles. Then we have incomplete metamorphosis. This is shown by less highly developed insects, and there are only 3 stages in this life cycle: the egg, the nymph, and the adult. The nymph resembles a miniature adult, but is not able to produce young. So you can think of the nymph as like a teen or a young adult. This life cycle has the disadvantage that both nymph and adults often share the same food source, and therefore can be in direct competition with food and one another for food. So before, in complete metamorphosis, I talked about how the caterpillar eats leaves, but the butterfly goes to milkweed. But in this case, in complete metamorphosis, it's completely opposite, and both the nymph and the adult share the same food source. And that's why they are in direct competition with one another. But the advantage is that the vulnerable pupal, which is the chrysalis phase, is avoided. Because sometimes when caterpillars are in the chrysalis phase, it's when other organisms can attack it. But in incomplete metamorphosis, it is avoided. The wings develop during the nymph stages as wings, and they grow larger at each successful instar. They're fully formed at the final molt into adulthood. The young, which is called a nymph, usually looks like small adults, but without the wings. The wings, therefore, develop outside the body and are said to be exopterygote. This type of life cycle is seen in various insects, including dragonflies, grasshoppers, earwigs, cockroaches, and true bugs. Okay, so here we have the life cycle of the butterfly. The butterfly and moths develop through a process called metamorphosis. Butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, and also bees have complete metamorphosis. The young, which is called a larva instead of the nymph, is very different from the adults. It also usually eats different types of food. There are 4 main stages in the metamorphosis of butterflies and moths: the egg, larva, pupa, and adult, which we talked about for complete metamorphosis. The stage 1, the egg. The egg is laid on plants by the adult female butterfly. These plants will then become the food for hatching caterpillars, which then eat the leaves that is hatched on. Eggs can be laid from spring, summer, or fall, and this depends on the species of butterfly. Females lay a lot of eggs at once so that at least some of them survive. Butterfly eggs can be very small. Then we have the larva, which is the feeding stage. The next stage is the larva. This is also called a caterpillar if the insect is a butterfly or the moth. The job is to eat and eat and eat. As the caterpillar grows, it splits its skin and sheds about 4 to 5 times. Food eaten at this time is stored and used later as an adult. Caterpillars can grow up to 100 times their size during this stage. For example, a monarch butterfly egg is the sign of a pinhead, and the caterpillar that hatches from its tiny egg isn't much bigger, but it will grow up to 2 inches long in several weeks. So I think that when we hear the words eat and eat and eat for a caterpillar, we can think of the book by Eric Carr, The Hungry Caterpillar, where it just keeps on eating. If you've seen that book, it goes exactly with the stages of a butterfly. The egg is laid on a leaf, then the egg, after hatching, the larva, it gives a caterpillar, which keeps on eating the leaves. And eventually, after keep on eating, it will form the cocoon, which is stage 3. So that was our egg. And this is what a caterpillar will be. It usually starts off super tiny, but then eventually can grow up to inches long. Then we have the pupa, which is the transition stage, which is the chrysalis. So when the caterpillar is full grown and stops eating, it becomes a pupa. The pupa of butterflies is also called the chrysalis. And depending on what species it is, the pupa may suspend under a branch, hidden in leaves, or buried underground. The pupa of many moths are protected inside a cocoon of silk. This stage can last from a few weeks, a month, or even longer. Some species have a pupal stage that lasts for 2 years. It may look like nothing is going on, but big changes are happening inside. Special cells that were present in the larva are now growing rapidly. They will become the legs, wings, eyes, and other parts of the adult butterfly. Many of the original larva cells will provide energy for these growing adult cells. Then we have our main and our last stage, which is the adult stage, also known as the mature stage. The adult stage is what most people think when they think of butterflies. They look very different from the larva. The caterpillar have a few eyes, stubby legs, and very short antennae. They don't even have wings. Adults also have long legs, long antennae, and compound eyes, which means that they have lots of eyes, small eyes. If you've seen a fly, if you've seen a zoom up fly, if you see the eye of a zoom up fly, you'll realize that there are thousands of them. You'll see like small itty bits, which are compound eyes. Adults have long antennae, unlike the caterpillar, and they have long legs. They can also fly by using their large and colorful wings. The one thing they can't do is grow. The caterpillar's job was to eat, but the adult's job is to mate and to lay eggs so that the life cycle starts again. But some species of adult butterflies get their energy by feeding on nectar from flowers. But many species don't even feed. They don't even eat. Flying comes in handy. The adult female can easily fly from place to place to find the right plant for its eggs. This is important because caterpillars cannot travel very far. If you've seen how a caterpillar travels, let me draw a diagram for how a caterpillar travels. So it's like an inchworm. We can see, let's say this is our caterpillar, and it wants to get to this leaf. It's not like a snake. It's not going to slither. In fact, what it's going to do is the opposite, and it's going to be like an inchworm. So it cannot just slide onto here like, ooh, ooh. No. What it's instead going to do is it's going to change. It's going to then fold like this. So from spread out, then it gets close. And then this is a point right here. So let me draw this point. Right here. This is like a pivot point in basketball. It's hold still, and the rest of the body, which is all of this, will then stretch out again. And then it will slowly get forward, and then you have this. So it's the caterpillar is not getting big. It's just that it pushes itself from the back up, and then this comes forward. So before it was stretched out, then the back comes up and it folds like this. And then here is our pivot, and then it stretches out again. So that's exactly how inchworms also move. So most adult butterflies can only live 1 to 2 weeks, but some species hibernate during the winter and may live several months, which is a long time for a butterfly. So in this diagram of the life cycle, we have our egg, it's super tiny. Then we have the caterpillar, it gets larger and larger, and then it becomes a chrysalis. And in the cocoon of the chrysalis, it slowly emerges into an adult. And then the adult will reproduce into an egg, the adult will die, and the cycle will start out all over again. So what about a cockroach, which is an incomplete metamorphosis? They do not have a pupa form. These include dragonflies, grasshoppers, and cockroaches. So all cockroaches go through 3 stages of life: the egg, nymph, and adult. The egg is the unborn stage. Then it becomes the nymph, which is the young stage, which is when most of its eating and feeding is done. Then it ends up with the adult, which is the final breeding stage, which includes the wings. While these insects usually live for about 6 to 15 months, the cockroach lifespan varies based on species, moisture, and temperature in each of the areas that it lives in. So we have our egg, our nymph, and our adult. Okay, so all spiders from the tiniest jumping spider to the largest tarantula have the same general life cycle. They mature in the 3 stages: the egg, spiderling, and adult. This is for spiders, of course. The egg is the embryonic stage. The mother spider first constructs an egg sac from strong silk that is tough enough to protect her developing offspring from the elements of the nature, which include, for example, in the desert, the winds, which can blow deserts, the desert sand, so sandstorms, and then, for example, in rainforest, for the rain, and for other creatures to attack it. She deposits her eggs inside it, fertilizing them as they emerge. A single egg sac may contain just a few eggs or several hundred, depending on what species you have. Spider eggs generally take a few weeks to hatch. In many spider species, the mother guards the egg sac from predators until the young hatch. But other species they don't have mothers which are so good. They will place the sac in a secure location and then will just leave the eggs to its own fate. Fun fact, wolf spiders' mothers, they carry the egg sac with them. When they're ready to hatch, they will bite the sac open to free the spiderlings. Also, the young spend as many as 10 days hanging onto their mother's back. Then we have the spiderling, which is the immature stage. Immature spiders, which are called spiderlings, resemble their parents but are considerably smaller when they first hatch from the egg sac. They immediately disperse, some walking and others by a behavior called ballooning. Spiderlings that disperse by ballooning will climb onto a twig or other projecting object and raise their abdomens. They will release threads of silk from their spinnerets, letting the silk catch the wind and will carry them away. While most spiderlings travel short distances this way, some can be carried to remarkable heights and across long distances. Spiderlings will molt repeatedly as they grow larger, and they are very vulnerable until the new exoskeleton forms completely. Most species reach adulthood after 5 to 10 molts, but in some species, the male spiders will be fully mature as they exit the egg sac. Female spiders are always larger than the males, so often take more time to mature. Then lastly, we have the adult stage, which is, again, the mature stage. When the spider reaches adulthood, it is ready to mate and begin the life cycle all over again. In general, female spiders live longer than males, and males often die after reproducing and mating. But spiders usually live just 1 to 2 years, but of course, it does vary by species. Tarantulas have unusually long lifespans, and some female tarantulas can live 20 years or more. So of course, in the diagram, we have our adult spider, which lays its eggs. The eggs are in an egg sac, which then goes into spiderlings. The spiderlings will hatch into a young spider and will become another adult spider. And the cycle, of course, will start over. Now we have amphibians, which include frogs, toads, and salamanders. So as we talked about in the amphibian lesson with vertebrates, we know that amphibians means dual life form and refers to the typical life history of these animals, in which an aquatic larva metamorphoses into a terrestrial adult. So this means that amphibians will lay its eggs and the larva, which is the second stage, the larva will be aquatic, which means it stays underwater and eventually becomes terrestrial and it can go on land. The 3 stages of amphibians include the egg, larva, and adult. The frog babies hatch into water as tiny tadpoles, with no legs or lungs, closely resembling fish. These frog youngsters will swim using their tails and will breathe through their gills. Then a humongous dramatic metamorphosis occurs. They lose their tails and the gills. The tadpoles will grow legs and will transform into a frog. Our adult frog will then crawl up onto shore, now spending time both in and out of the water. Hence, they live in a dual life form. So in this diagram, let's talk about it. Remember, if you raise your hand, it means you have a question. Please do not raise your hand just for fun. And if I call on you, don't just say, oh, I accidentally clicked it. So that's another form of etiquette. So I'll do the slide, then I'll answer questions. So we start off with our egg, the spawn. the female frogs will lay their eggs in the water. Then our tadpoles hatch from the eggs and will swim and breathe with gills. So if you notice, all fish have gills to breathe. That's why they don't ever need air from above. But at 6 weeks, external gills will disappear and the tadpoles will breathe air with the lungs that grow, like us humans. And they'll eventually have to go up to the surface of water to breathe air. At 8 weeks, the hind legs form, and at 12 weeks, the front legs form and the tail shrinks, and the froglet can leave the water. And our last is our adult frog. The frog's tail is totally absorbed by the body, and the frog lives on land. Okay, if you raise your hand, it means you have a question. So I'm going to call on people for the questions. Okay, Harika, what's your question? You have a question? Harika?
I don't know.
Okay, in the participants, if you have your hand raised, it means you have a question. Pradyam, do you have a question? Okay. Prisha, do you have a question? No question? Okay.
Oh, yes, I do have a question. How
Okay.
long, you said that that tarantulas have a long lifespan. How long do they live?
So we talked about that. Tarantulas, they live for about 20 years or more of female tarantulas, because females are the ones that live longer than the males, but the longest ones are about 20 years. Okay, we have 8 people raising their hands. That means you all have a question. If you don't have a question, please put your hand down. Okay. So, Kriti, what's your question?
My question is, so when frogs are under water, they breathe with gills. So when they come out of the water, then they have lungs to breathe in from air.
Okay, so let me explain that again. So when they hatch, they're tadpoles, and tadpoles have gills. But after 6 weeks, their gills will disappear. So they will lose the gills and they will grow lungs. So after they have lungs, they won't need gills ever again. Because like us, if you've seen, for example, whales don't have gills, they have lungs. That's why sometimes you see them at the surface of the water and they spray water from their blowhole. That's because they need to get the air and they have lungs. But when they dive under the water, they can hold their breaths, just like frogs. Okay, so good question. Okay, Chahak, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, what's your question?
Like you said, how the caterpillars don't slither, right?
Yes.
Do they go like wave type?
I'm sorry?
Do the caterpillars go like wavy?
Yes, so if you remember what my diagram was with the annotation, I drew a caterpillar. It's like a straight line. And then how it does, it goes like an inchworm. It will,
Okay.
this is our caterpillar. If this is our caterpillar, what it will do is it will come up and then go down. And then we'll go down. So if we start off like this, of course, it will come up and then we'll go down. Come up and then we'll go down. It starts off normal, straight. Then the middle part of it will come up. Then it'll stretch there. Again, it'll come up and then it'll stretch. So there is always that one point that pivots after coming down, this point. It doesn't move forward. But then when we go up, it'll move forward. So that's how they move. Okay. So who else has a question? Pratyag, what's your question? Do you have a question, Pratyag? If you don't have a question, please put your hand down. Okay.
I do.
Okay.
So the question is, how many weeks would it be before there is an adult frog?
For what? What does the frog have? So for the frog, if you look at the diagram, the tadpoles gills will disappear after 6 weeks. Hind legs will be formed at 8 weeks. The front legs will form and the tail will shrink at 12 weeks. And then the frog's tail is totally absorbed in about 16 or so weeks. Okay. Harika, what's your question?
My question is a tarantula spider?
Yes, tarantula spider.
Are they like garden spiders or like?
So if you think about it, tarantulas can live anywhere. They can live in rainforests, they can live in deserts, they can live in gardens. So I wouldn't call it a garden spider, but more like a terrestrial spider, and that it can live anywhere on Earth. Okay.
Are they big?
Are they big? Yes, they're humongous. If you've seen a tarantula, they're like about the size of my hand. They're not the biggest spiders, but they are pretty big. Okay, Sarang, what's your question?
What is the lifespan of a frog?
Excuse me, the lifetime of a frog?
Yeah, like how long does it live?
How long do they live? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that in right before the quiz. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Adam, what's your question? Adam? You have a question?
Hey, so my question was, so is that, you know, the caterpillars, right? How long does it take to turn into a butterfly in the?
How long is it inside the chrysalis? How long is it in the chrysalis, or how long to get into a butterfly?
No. How long is it in the cocoon?
Okay, it's about a few weeks, a month or longer, because it depends on how fast. It depends on the outside temperatures, but some species can last for 2 years. But if you average it it'll be about a month. Okay, good question.
It's related to that. What's the caterpillar's what's the butterfly's wings made out of?
So again, the wingspan will depend on which butterfly. We have many different butterflies, but I think we can go to about a couple inches. Okay, I'll answer just 2 more questions. Then we're done. Okay, Bhavin, what's your question?
Can they swim? Can frogs swim?
Yes. So if we look at the definition, they're amphibians, which means they can live in water and in land. So if they can live in water, they can swim too. Okay. And now I'll answer one more question. Prisha, what's your question?
Are tarantulas like one of the spiders that if they're like, one of their like, I don't remember what it's called. Like, if it breaks off, can it grow back again? Like one of those animals that can do that?
I am not 100% sure, but I do not think they can. I mean, sometimes if they lose a leg, they might be able to grow, but I'm not 100% sure. But I'm pretty sure they can. They can.
Okay.
So I'm going to make sure that we are going on a good speed because we are only on. Okay, here we are. We're on slide 17. Okay, so we're over halfway, but after the quiz, if you guys have a couple more questions about the slide, I'll get ready to answer them. Okay, so what about reptiles? Our reptiles include the snakes, lizards, alligators, and turtles, and other crocodilians and other tortoise-like creatures. All reptiles are cold-blooded, which means they are ectotherms, which we talked about in our vertebrate, not invertebrate lesson. They rely on the environment to generate body heat. So in the chat, type if you remember another name for ectotherms. Another name for ectotherm. Okay, here's a hint. Look at the definition. Okay, we have a correct answer. No, remember gymnosperm is for plants. Okay, so exactly correct. It's okay, you could have guessed if you weren't here, but that's completely okay. So you guys are right. It is cold-blooded. Reptiles are cold-blooded. They rely on the environment to generate body heat. But let's continue. They have similar, okay, one second. Guys, if you raise your hand, that means you have a question. Can you please raise your hand after the quiz? After the quiz, I'll answer your guys' questions. So don't raise your hand now, okay? Because it will send me notifications and it'll be hard for other people to learn. Do not raise your hand. Okay, please don't raise your hand. Raise your hand after the quiz. Please do not raise your hand. Okay. So they have similar life cycles that begins as an egg and then goes to a hatchling, then to juveniles, and then an adult. Metamorphosis does not occur in reptiles. Our eggs. So the reptiles begin their lives as embryos in amniotic eggs. The embryos are cushioned and protected by the surrounding membrane. These eggs are larger than eggs that do not have amniotic membranes. The egg yolk is another part of the egg. It provides nourishment for the embryo. A separate membrane eliminates waste and provides gas exchange. In most cases, the eggs are buried or placed underground after fertilization. Most reptiles, such as garter snakes, give birth to young, live young. But like snakes, they give birth to eggs. They give eggs, and those are, so garter snakes give birth to live young. That's what humans do and mammals. But of course, we have that's the exception. But most snakes, they will lay eggs. And most reptiles will, such as crocodiles and tortoises, will also lay their eggs. Some hold the eggs inside until they hatch. A very small group of reptiles compose an exception. The armadillo lizard is one species nourished in the placenta instead of in an egg. Okay. So what about the hatching? When a reptile is ready to hatch, the creature uses an egg tooth to break through the shell of the egg. Once the shell is open, then the baby will typically remain in the shell for 12 to 14 hours. The little reptile is able to care for and defend himself from birth. Okay. Then we have our juvenile. Juvenile reptiles look similar to the adults for their species. They do not undergo metamorphosis, common in insects and amphibians. They grow slowly until they reach adult size and sexual maturity. The time a reptile sends as a juvenile varies by species. The green iguana, for example, reaches adulthood and sexual maturity when it is approximately 16 months old and 9 inches old from snout to vent. Then we have our adult. Mature reptiles can reproduce. The female will bury the fertilized eggs in a hole or lay them underground. In most cases, the female reptile leaves the eggs to hatch alone. For some reptiles like pythons and crocodilians, they will care and protect the eggs until they hatch. Some reptiles who give birth to live young will also provide some care for their hatchlings. The time a reptile spends in adulthood varies greatly. Some reptiles have very short lifespans. For example, corn snakes live only 6 to 8 years in the wild, but other reptiles live much longer. Alligators have lifespans of 35 to 50 years, and desert tortoises can live 80 years or more. So in our life cycle of the Komodo dragon, we have our egg, it becomes a hatchling, and then our 2-year-old Komodo dragon. Eventually become an adult male or female, and it will give birth to a couple eggs, and then it will die. The life cycle of a bird. The following describe the 6 stages of a bird. It all begins with an egg. We've all known that since the start. Do not raise your hand. A special hard structure called the egg tooth forms on the baby's bird beak to help it break the eggshell. The special tooth drops off a few days later. A baby bird that has just hatched is called a hatchling. While the hatchling is growing in the nest and being fed by its parents, we call it a nestling. When the nestling grows, its flight feathers and is ready. It grows its flight feathers and is ready to leave the nest. And when it takes its first flight, it fledges. We called a bird that has just fledged a fledgling. A fledgling has fluffy down feathers and is often fed by its parents for several weeks or more. Its flight feathers continue to grow and its wing muscles get stronger. When a fledgling or juvenile has finished growing, it becomes a mature or adult bird. An adult bird attracts a mate, builds a nest, and raises young to start the cycle all over again. So for the robin, we have our egg, then our hatchling, then our nestling, our fledgling, our juvenile, and our adult. Now we have our fish. Fish progress through the following life cycle stages. The egg. In the stage, the embryo is formed inside a hardened egg, and once fertilized, that it will develop organs. After this, eye spots and tails are completely developed, and species living in warmer water hatch faster compared to than living in colder water. Larvae, once the eggs are hatched, they're known as larvae. They have a yolk sac. The yolk sac is the nutrition source for them. They can survive up to 2 to 4 days by their yolk sac food supply. Then we have our fry. Young fish are called fry once the yolk sac is fully absorbed. In the stage, they are ready to start eating on their own. They go through several development phases during the first few months. They are known as fry. A juvenile. In this phase, fishes acquire characteristics of an adult fish, like fins, color, body parts, etc., and they are considered juveniles. Then we have our smolt. In this stage, fishes are growing rapidly. Usually the smolt stays in backrush water. Then we have our adult. In this stage, fish are able to reproduce. Now they complete the migration from freshwater to saltwater, and then we have spawning. Remains of the females will release their eggs in water, and males will release milk that helps to fertilize the eggs. So for example, in our fish, we have our egg to our spawning, which gives our eggs, and then our larvae to a fry and becomes a juvenile, becomes the smolt, and then an adult. For sharks, we have an adult shark which lays eggs. The eggs are oviparity and then gives newborn, the youth shark, and then becomes an adult over again. Our last type is our mammals. A mammal is an animal that gets milk from its mother, has a backbone, and has fur or hair on its body, and is warm-blooded. Usually, the mothers stay and care for their young until the babies are old enough to be independent. Each mammal goes through the various stages of life: birth, growth, reproduce, and die. The gestation period. Before a mammal is born, it grows and develops inside an egg or its mother. The gestation period, or the time when a mammal grows inside its mother, is different across species. Mammal size and mammal group affect the gestation period of mammals. Some larger mammals, like elephants, take more time to develop before they're ready to be born. Smaller mammals, like mice, do not have long gestation periods. For example, the gestation period of an Asian elephant is 645 days. That's almost 2 years. By comparison, mice have a gestation period of 20 days. And if you think about humans have a gestation period of about 9 months for the mother, and then it'll give birth in about 9 months. That's nothing compared to the Asian elephant, which has 2 years. So in this shows like a mammal, which is a human. This is in the gestation period. In the womb, we have our newborn, which then becomes a baby. Then we have our toddler, preschooler, and primary school boy, which is the childhood. Then we have the adolescence, which is a teenager. Then we have our adulthood, and then we have our old person or old age, which is usually the time where they will die. Okay, so that was today's lesson. I'll quickly answer the question of the frog's lifetime. Usually it's about 10 to 12 years. Okay, so let's go. It'll take about 2 minutes. Let's go over the main slides. Let's go over the main things. So a life cycle is a series of stages that a living thing goes through life. It always repeats, and it shows how living things grow and change over time. There are 2 main types of metamorphosis: incomplete and complete. Metamorphosis means change of form. In complete metamorphosis, we have egg, larva, pupa, and adult. It includes butterflies, moths, bees, etc. And the pupa or chrysalis is a stage of internal reorganization. In complete metamorphosis, it has egg, then the nymph, and adult. Some examples are dragonflies, grasshoppers, and earwigs, and cockroaches. And they do not have chrysalis, the chrysalis phase. Butterflies use complete metamorphosis. They use egg, the larva, pupa, and adult. The egg is laid by an adult female butterfly on leaves, which hatch caterpillars. The larva, which is the feeding stage, is when the caterpillar starts eating lots and lots of food. Then we have our pupa, which is the transition stage, which is also called a chrysalis. The adult is the mature stage, and it has a butterfly. They look very different. Long legs, long antenna, and compound eyes. In cockroaches, all cockroaches go through 3 stages of life: the egg, nymph, and adult. We have in the spider, we have the egg, spiderling, and adult. The spiderling is the immature stage. The egg is the embryonic stage. The adult is the mature stage, and tarantulas have usually long lifespans. Amphibians, like the frog, live in both water and land. They include egg, larva, and adults. They start off with tadpole, then without gills, with legs, a froglet, and then an adult frog. In reptiles, we have eggs, hatchlings, juveniles, and adults. Metamorphosis does not occur in reptiles. The eggs, most reptiles lay eggs, but some, of course, do not. Then we have hatchlings. And when a reptile is ready to hatch, the creature uses an egg tooth to break through. The juvenile reptiles look very similar to the adults, and they do not undergo metamorphosis, which is common in insects and amphibians. The adults, okay, do not ask remote control of my screen. Okay, the adult can reproduce, and the female reptile will bury the fertilized eggs in a hole or lay them underground. Then we have our bird. We have our egg tooth, which is formed to break the egg. We have our hatchling, then a nestling. Then we have our fledgling and the juvenile. In fish, we have the egg, then the larvae, the fry, juvenile, smolt, adult, and then spawning. The main things are that the egg, and then they are living in warmer water, hatches faster. Our fry, our young fish, which are called fry when the yolk sac is fully absorbed. We have our smolt, which is where fish grow rapidly. And then we have spawning, where females release the eggs in water. Then lastly, we have our mammals. They go through birth, growth, reproduce, and they die. The gestation period is when the mammal grows inside the mother, and it is different across different species. Okay. So that was today's lesson. Now that we've finished today's lesson, I'll post the quiz link in the chat. You can all take the quiz and do your best, and good luck. Okay, guys, let's go over the quiz now. Okay, let's share screen. Here is our quiz that we had today, the life cycle quiz. And let's see if we get 100%. So we are class, of course. When does a life cycle end? So when an organism rots, when an organism dies, of course, then its life cycle ends. What does metamorphosis mean? Remember, you can type your answers in the chat. Metamorphosis, of course, metamorphosis, it means the transformation in shape. What type of metamorphosis uses a chrysalis? Complete metamorphosis. Which type of metamorphosis do dragonflies, grasshoppers, and earwigs use? They all use incomplete metamorphosis. Which is not a stage in metamorphosis for butterflies? The answer is a nymph. Nymph is only an incomplete metamorphosis. Which is the feeding stage in the metamorphosis for a butterfly? That is the larva. Another name for the chrysalis is the pupa. That's the chrysalis stage or the pupa stage, which is not a stage in incomplete metamorphosis. We have our egg, we have our nymph, and then we have our adult. The pupa does not occur, which is not a stage for spiders. Spiderling, of course, adult and eggs. It's nymph. Is the immature stage for spider? Of course, that's our spiderling. And when do spiders reach maturity? That's our adult, mature. For frogs, the stage after eggs is tadpoles with no gills. That is clearly false, because the stage after eggs is tadpole with the gills. Then they lose their gills. Metamorphosis occurs in reptiles. Of course, that's false. When a bird takes its first flight, what is it called? It is called a fledgling. What stage is between the juvenile and adult for fish? The answer is a smolt. And last question, when a mammal is growing inside of the adult, what is it called? The answer is gestation. Let's make sure we have 100%. Okay, got 100% on the quiz. Okay, guys, good job. Now, for those who have questions, I am going to answer them now. I hope everyone stay, because these questions will also help you guys to learn. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. That's okay. Oh, I will also tell the people who got 100%. Okay, let's answer. Okay, I will only answer 5 questions though. Okay, so here are the people getting the answers. Tia, Chahek, Akshat, Anis, and Arav. No one else can raise their hand. Okay, Tia, what's your question?
My question was so it wasn't really a question, but I wasn't actually here for the full lesson. I came around at the end, so I only got
That's okay. That's completely okay. It's just that if you weren't here, we just talked about it. You can find the whole lesson on the Facebook page. Your parents are all on it. The YouTube is posted. That's why we're recording it. So that's okay. Okay, next question. Chahak, what's your question?
That for the what is it? The immature stage for spider is,
Yes.
why isn't it adult?
Because, okay, so immature means they're not mature yet. Like they're still like a kid. So that's like a spiderling. The adult is when they're matured. So they're not, so the adult is the mature stage. That's when they are ready to mate. That's when they're ready to begin the life cycle again. But the immature stage is when they so as kids, we are in the immature stage, and if we were all spiders, and our parents are all in the mature stage. Okay, good question. Good question. Okay, Akshat, what's your question? Okay, 1 second. Okay, what's your question?
So you said that tarantula spiders can live anywhere. So can they live like in Antarctica?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mostly anywhere. They cannot live in, of course, the Antarctics, and they cannot live in the Arctic and Antarctic. No spiders live there. No insects live there.
Okay.
Okay. So good catch. Anis, what's your question? You have a question?
How many years does a person live?
Okay, so of course, just like the reptiles, birds can live for different times. So it depends on what bird. So I had a competition. I was the expert on birds, but I can tell you for sure that a couple of them can. So for example, parrots, they can live like 30 years, 30 to 40 years. So of course, it depends on what bird you have. So, okay. You can do more research on that. And Arav, what's your question?
So can't the animals die before hatching, like giving birth?
Okay, so yes, that's a good catch too. Animals can die at any time, but if an animal would have a perfect life, like if this Komodo dragon, so for example, if you didn't know, Komodo dragons can be cannibals. Adults can eat the hatchlings. That's why they live in trees. But if a hatchling does get eaten, that the life cycle for that hatchling is done. That's when it dies, so it ends. But if it weren't to die, but it will die at old age, then it will go through this life cycle. But this is the biggest life cycle it can go through. Okay, this is all it can go through. It can stop anywhere. It can stop at the eggs. It can be smashed. The hatchling, it can be eaten, something like that. But it doesn't always have to have a whole life. Okay, it doesn't have to have a full life. For example, one human can be murdered. They can, for example, they can be poisoned. We can get in a car crash or an accident. So it's not like we're going to die of old age all the time. It always depends on where you live, what environment you're in. Is it a safe environment? Are you safe yourself? Okay, and I'll answer one last question. No more. Tia, what's your question?
Again, like I'm not sure for the Komodo dragon. If we come all the way to the end one, I'm not sure what that's called.
Excuse me? I didn't hear you.
So from the adult and female dragon.
The adult amphibian?
Yeah, what's the next one called?
So for the adult amphibian, and what's after that? So that's it. So after an adult amphibian, they will either die of old age or they'll get killed.
Okay.
Last question, then we are done. Okay, and Saheli, what's your question?
How long is the reptile's life cycle?
What life cycle? The garter. I didn't hear what animal. The garter. Which animal? I didn't hear. I'm sorry. Which animal? I didn't hear.
reptile, like a crocodile or alligator?
Okay, so of course it depends on what you have, but alligators live for 35 to 50 years. Tortoises can live over 80 to 100 or over 100 years. Then we have, of course, our snakes, which can live about 30 years at most or some around that. And then we have our lizards, which also depend. Okay, so that is it for today's lesson. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you everyone for joining again. And oh wait, yes, I'll give out the shout out for people who got 100%, of course. Okay, so let's see who got it. So only 2 people got 100%. Our first person is Satvik Sharma. He got 100%. Corn snakes are a type of snakes. And our other 100% is, let's see. Aryan Patel. So good job, both of you, for getting 100%. Next time someone gets 100% on the quiz, they will obviously get a shout out. So good job to them. If you want to get a shout out, make sure you get 100% or try to get 100% next time. And of course, thank you everyone for joining today's lesson. I will post the poll and you are all free to go.